Hello, everybody. This is Hans Vargas, and I am joined by Ruby, who is somebody I met a while ago in all places, New York, I believe, Ruby. And he is representing Scribe Security, a very interesting company. Um, I am right now very interested in data security, and software security, in my opinion, is the foundation for data security and the protection of that data. So today I would like to have a conversation with Ruby and by extension, share this conversation with you, I guess, the viewers or those with my LinkedIn contact list. So if you find this interesting, maybe you haven't heard of Scribe Security until now. This is basically a way for an introduction, you know, of what is Scribe Security and how can you leverage perhaps these novel ideas and the solutions that Ruby represents in your organization. Maybe you haven't thought about it, but this could be perhaps a way to get to know this solution, the capabilities that brings Scribe. With that, Ruby, why don't you introduce yourself and maybe start telling us about what is Scribe Security about?
Yes, thank you, Hans. Thank you for having me here. I'm honored and I appreciate it. Scribe, in Scribe, we see ourselves as the guardians of the entire software factory. And when I said the software factory, I mean everything in it, starting with the artifacts, their components and subcomponents, all the dependencies, etc., but also the machinery, the CI/CD pipelines, and all the SDLC processes. We look at the software factory like a factory and then try to protect it maybe in a similar way in the digital equivalent of how you would protect a regular factory. And the way that it works is that we actually deploy collectors or sensors throughout your entire SDLC and start to generate and collect security evidence of everything and anything that happens. And then we aggregate all this security evidence, we sign everything continuously, tie together all the data points in a knowledge graph, enrich it with intelligence from other sources, and then we allow to do several things. The first thing is full discoverability of your development assets. It could be workflow, pods, repos, everything that in your development environments. And actually, we find out that many security and R&D practitioners don't really know what's in their R&D because there is a lot of chaos there.
Okay.
So we can map the lineage from code to cloud of everything that is there and how they interact with each other.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying is basically in my world, trying to understand where your data is one of the first steps to know how to protect it. So it sounds like you are saying the same thing, but in this case, in the software development world, if you need to have this visibility, you have to discover this. And you mentioned collecting evidence, aggregating that evidence. And because of that, actually brings to mind a post I've just put this week about, and it's actually related to some of the use cases you have, is the compliance with software supply chain regulations and standards. The post I'm referencing is related to a few executive orders that I've seen that were published late as the last administration in the US was exiting, March 12th, as well as January 16.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about the executive order that is improving in national security and as well as the strengthening in promoting innovation and in the nation's cybersecurity. Inside those are very prescriptive recommendations that are going to come to at some point to be enforced, especially for those who sell software to the government, but you know how that trickles down to the industry as well.
Mhm.
So how is that related to the things you can do in your use case, which is helping organizations comply with the software supply chains regulations and standards? Let's start
Yeah.
there.
Well, that's a great question. And actually, you know, the executive order that you've mentioned, the one from January 16, 2025, we were very happy when we've read what's in it
I
because,
imagine, right?
yeah, so this executive order number the 14144, and it was published around 3 years after the previous executive order 14028. The first one, the 14028 from 22, or sorry, from 21, it was mainly about transparency and software bill of materials. Okay. The
Actually,
new
let me quote
one,
it. It says here, recommendations for mitigating the risk of software vulnerabilities, secure
yeah,
software development practices for generative AI and the dual use of foundation models. That's a
mhm,
big mouthful of, but I actually tried to read that executive order, and at least the highlights are very interesting because it's
yes.
really good in putting a good footing for securing
Yes,
software.
yes, definitely, definitely. So the new executive order, the 14144, it has 8 sections, and section number 2 deals with software supply chain security, okay, which is a big deal for the federal government and actually for everybody. And it talks, the big highlights are that everything needs to be based on machine readable attestations of secure SDLC development. Okay, so secure software development and secure SDLC practices. What it means is that you need an unequivocal signed evidence that you've done everything right in order to sell to the federal government and to order to have a safe harbor if something bad happens. So the first thing is attestations of everything that you've done. And everything means everything. It means the vulnerabilities, the misconfigurations, the SDLC processes, the fact that you have ran security audit like SAS or DAS, etc. The second bullet is about human readable validation of those attestations. This is more about analytics and the reports and the way for you to understand the risk based on all these attestations. Then there was this notion that you need to keep an archive where you can understand which version of software went to which customer or to which federal agency in order to understand if something happened, who is affected from, for example, a new log4j, all right? There is also a mandatory requirement, which we saw for the first time for provenance and integrity to understand that your software has not been tampered.
Right, where
And
the sources of that software is coming from is from a safe. I think we can even touch on Salsa, which is the open source. Uh,
yes,
it's the
exactly.
standard now for software development, basically for those things, right? The attestation of the
Yes.
software comes from a source that is trusted and is not
Yeah.
just
So Salsa actually it has 3 levels. Level 1 and 2 are more about provenance. Level 1, level 2 is signed provenance, and level 3 is also about other stuff like separating environments, etc. Uh, but basically, provenance means that you can vouch to the fact that your container is indeed the output of your build and not somebody else's build, for example, an attacker, all right? This is really important in order to understand that you've not been tampered.
So what you're basically describing here is with this new executive order, in simple terms, the way I see it is attesting that the life cycle of your software is from beginning to end is secure. You've done
Yes.
attestations, which is machine readable, to the validation that is human interaction, to through the delivery. In this case, if you're a producer of software, that's going to go to the federal government. And we know that a lot of the big tech companies are wanting to sell to the government. So if they implement these things internally, that's it. Somehow it's going to impact also the consumer, right, or us, or the industry in general. So I think this is a good thing, and which is a good thing for you because you are in the midst of helping companies that develop software have all this visibility for them to be able to attest that they've done their due diligence. Did I
Yes,
read
yes,
that out correctly?
definitely. So I think that basically what the executive order is about is just about making sure that everybody holds to the best practices that that there are today, and making sure that they can attest to the fact that they did it right, right? I think that first of all, it's for security reasons, and secondly, it's for compliance reasons. And indeed, I think that, as you said, the hope of the legislators is that first, the direct vendors for the federal government are the ones that need to comply and to provide this attestation that they've done everything right for provenance and vulnerability disclosure and everything. But they hope that there will be some domino effect, and their vendors and the vendors of their vendors will hold
Right.
to the same standards in the end of the day. And yes, for us is great news because it describes exactly what we do. I mean,
Okay.
Scribe is about machine readable attestations of everything, starting with vulnerabilities and non-exploitations and licenses issue and reputation and CI/CD misconfigurations and SDLC processes, for example, making sure that there was a code review for every commit or that there was no last minute commit after you already ran your SAST, etc., etc., etc.
Okay. So I did like what you mentioned here in terms of driving this change from, first of all, security mindset and later for the compliance purposes, because sometimes
Yeah.
it's the opposite. Like you have to comply, but compliance is not necessarily a benchmark for security. Sometimes you do whatever the,
Yeah.
the benchmark is, and you stop there, and that stop sometimes is lacking more things that could make it secure. So if you do security, sometimes you're going to go beyond the compliance. So I did like that. You also mentioned earlier the software factory. Walk us through some of the, I guess this is a visual in my head when you look at a factory. So you're saying this is a software factory, and I think you even have in your website a representation of that. So what do you mean? How do you make that analogy that you are helping? I mean, I'm trying to get to the value
Yeah.
proposition, right? What do you do, and how you help people to get visibility over this software factory, which many companies have software development going. They're not necessarily consumers of SaaS applications or commercial applications, but also they're developing, sometimes
Yeah.
developing to connect to those applications. So there
Yeah.
is some of that software factory within the company, and it's not unheard of that you onboard software developers to create custom pieces of software. So software factory, what does that mean? And in the context of Scribe, how do you help us
Yeah.
have the visibility over, or help
Yes.
everybody that has a need to have that visibility over the entire process of a software factory?
Yeah. So just in a term of simple analogy, I always like the analogy of a restaurant. When you go to a restaurant, first of all, you're interested about the food, right? Because you're going to eat it. So you naturally you would like to understand what are the ingredients, okay? Because you don't want to put something poisonous in your mouth, right? So the ingredients are really important, and the ingredients could be parallel to SBOM, software bill of materials, where you understand what are the dependencies and the direct dependencies and the non-direct dependencies that are in a software, okay? It's really important, and then you need to understand what are the consequences, vulnerabilities, non-exploitations, non-permissive licenses, etc. Now, this is the food, but there is also the kitchen, okay? Because the kitchen is also important because somebody can put something in the food or not wash their hands, right? So the hygiene of the kitchen and the processes are really important as well. And I think that the software factory is everything, is the kitchen, is the raw materials, is the machinery, the pan and the pots and everything that you're using. And in the end, of course, it's also the food, it's the final product, okay? Now, the way that we look at it is through two lenses. The first lens is the lens of visibility, which I treat as the security posture, okay?
Okay.
So there is the discovery phase, which I talked about to understand the lineage. And then there is the visibility phase in order to understand the security posture of the product with all the dependencies and what they mean for you, risk-wise, and also of the pipelines. What are the security gaps in the pipelines, in your Jenkins, in your GitHub, in your Azure DevOps, in your Kubernetes, etc. Now, this is really important in order to understand the risk and in order to prioritize what you need to do in order to take down your attack safe surface, okay? But the other part is just as important, which is to automate prevention, compliance, and trust into your DevOps toolchains. And that is actually the only way to do it because manually will not hold and is not scalable. So what we've done is that all of our collectors are also used as gates. And what
Okay.
it means is that they generate security evidence such as SBOM, provenance, security scans, results of your current AppSec tools, like the context, who did what with what tools at what bunch, etc. And they sign everything continuously. And then our collectors are able to verify any SDLC control you can think of, because we're using policy as code, at every stage of the SDLC. And if needed, they are able to gate the process. They can break the build or stop bad stuff in the admission controller. And that is actually the only way in order to curb automatically the risks that developers or attackers insert into your product, to do it automatically. It's like putting guardrails around the kindergarten where the kids can play inside, but they cannot go out to the road and get hit by a bus, okay? This is why guardrails are
This is an
really
interesting point you're making. The automation portion. It sounds like you can actually prevent in some ways. If I use the word prevention, I guess through policies, right? And
yes,
that's it. This is
definitely.
not allowed. You did not complete this step in the process for this product to be, to go to the end, or if nothing else, alerts. Somebody will say, you know, there was something not approved here. Did I describe that correctly? Again, I'm not a developer, but it sounds I have basic a knowledge of how the software development process goes.
Yeah,
You want to expand
100% you're
more on
right.
that?
Yeah, you're right, exactly. You know, the notion, the traditional notion in the last few years was shifting everything left to the developers and letting the developers deal with vulnerabilities in the IDE, which actually is a good idea. And if you can do that, and you should do that, but it will not solve your problem. And actually, in the future, it's not going to solve anything because of vibe coding and AI generated code, right? Shifting left to developers is not effective if developers don't code anymore. They just provide prompts in English and AI generate
Yeah, we're
huge
going to
chunks
get to
of
the AI
code.
in a
Yeah,
second,
yeah.
but how does your solution then empowers or helps the developers to do more effective work? Because we want it to be effective, secure, more efficient, scalable. So
Yeah.
how is it your solution can help to do?
Okay, that's a great point because we are actually not a tool for developers. If everything is okay, developers should not know that Scribe is there.
You
Developers
mentioned the
should,
guardrails, right? So I guess
exactly,
that's what you're going.
developers should develop. This is what they should do. They should provide a high quality code with as few bugs as possible, as fast as possible. That's it. Okay. Now, of course, if they can use only code from good repos, they should do that. Okay. They should not introduce vulnerabilities to your code. However, this is as far as they can go. Okay. Now, what we do is we put the guardrails around any SDLC policies, not just vulnerabilities. It's about access control. It's about code reviews. It's about using GPG keys. It's about understanding and validating signatures and digest and provenance and things that developers has nothing to do with. Okay. And basically, this is the manifestation of the secure by design concept. Because what it means is that if through the entire SDLC, your product met all the controls or policies that you deem as mandatory, it means that the product is secure by design. Okay? Because if it was not, it would not go through all the process. It would not be in production. Okay? And this
Before I go to,
shortens time to market because you don't have to deal with recalls and with problems when it gets to the customer.
how do you get visibility over the multiple languages or platforms that developers are developing on?
So we don't need to scan. We are not providing SAST or DAST, okay?
Okay.
We are just providing a SCA, software composition analysis, and we do it for all the languages, plus everything else that I've described, okay? So, collecting the metadata, signing, generating the SBOM, enriching it with everything. So we are actually pretty agnostic to the languages,
Okay.
and because we don't do SAST, we don't really care too much about it.
SBOM is standing for Software Bill of Materials, right?
Indeed, yes. This
Okay.
is the list of all the dependencies and all the ingredients, the components and the subcomponents you have in your code.
Okay. So I know we are limited in time because we want to keep these conversations short, but also just give enough information for somebody
Yeah.
who is watching to say, hey, that sounds interesting. I want to talk to Ruby. I want to finish by highlighting something that caught, I mean, it's also everybody's talking about it, but harnessing the AI-driven development without compromising security. Everybody's talking about AI. We hear about, just natural language and we're going to start programming, but how does that relate to things that you can help in terms of
Mm-hmm.
harnessing the AI and how to that
Yeah.
when doing so you're doing it securely? Can you give us a little bit of an insight on what does that mean? How can you help with that?
Yes. Sure. I'll just provide like a couple of examples. The first one is that, the better AI agents like copilots or cursor, the better they get, the more code the developers push to production was created by AI. And actually,
Mhm.
AI can introduce risks that you're not even aware of because they can use dependencies you did
Yeah,
not choose, right? They just copy or
or they're going and grabbing it from an
yes, exactly. They're grabbing it. You don't know from where from. Okay. So in that respect, it is even more critical to get an SBOM to understand in the end of the day what's in your code. What did the AI brought in and how does that affect the risk that you later or inherit um, to your that your customers are affected from. And and I think that putting guardrails around such risks, for example, don't let code with non-permissive licenses go out. Don't let code with critical vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited to go to production. For example, unpatched version of Log4j. AI can bring you this into your code, right? Or if they use a dependency or a package with very low reputation. So you could put guardrails around this, and then you could also put guardrails around the processes, because what we see is that gradually AI is also taking the DevOps role and can build the software, and you don't actually know if it ran all the necessary testing. Okay, it should, but did it not? So this is
So
something that is also very useful.
does Scribe can help with that?
Yes,
I
of
know that
course.
is vulnerability. I mean, scanning your code, making sure the code is without vulnerabilities is something
Yeah.
that you can help as well.
Yes. So
Okay.
we understand the vulnerabilities in your code based on the software composition analysis and the SBOM. Okay, that's the way. So once we understand what's in your code, we can let you know what are the vulnerabilities, the reputation, the exploitation, and the other risk that is in your code. And also, since our collectors have full visibility to all the processes, we can tell you if the AI or actually a developer, okay, made a shortcut, okay, and did not go through a process that you have set as mandatory.
I mean, that sounds interesting to me. And I'm not a developer, so I'm thinking somebody who's listening to this and has a team or manages or has visibility over that, they will find this very interesting as well. So I guess my goal here was, like I said at the beginning, uh, a secure software development process, and again, the visibility and the things that maybe you can help with. It's only going to help the protection of the data, which is one of the theories that I'm very interested in. So I'm happy to be able to have share with you about Scribe Security, and maybe there are people that are interested to hear more about it. So I will say that if you are, let me know if you want an introduction, or you can reach directly to Ruby. I'm going to give you Ruby the last minute here to share how people get in touch with you.
So first of all, you can find me on LinkedIn or email me to Rubi, RUBI, @scribesecurity.com, or just reach out through the contact us section in our website. It's pretty easy to get
Okay,
contact
and
with
they
me.
can set up
Yeah.
a call and do a POC or something like that. Well, I think seeing is believing. That's my motto, and I think based on what I've continued learning from you, meeting you in person, as well as hearing more about what you do, I think that you are into something very interesting. Um, I'm glad to hear that there is legislation coming your way to support the need for solutions like yours. So that's also encouraging, and wish you the best. And thank you for your time. This was a great conversation, and I hope those who are watching this find it interesting as well. Like I said, if you need anything or want an introduction, I'll be glad to and make an introduction to Ruby and Scribe Security. Thank you for listening, and until the next chapter of this conversation. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Hans.